Hello, beautiful creatures. I'm Witch Belle, and today we are going to conquer episode 2 of that old-time religion. It has been a while since I have played this. As just a small recap, 3 of the different clergy of this town came to this investigator to find their Baptist colleague who has gone missing. So let's see if we can find him in this episode. A little bit more information from the Steam website for episode 2 says it adds roughly another 1 to 2 hours of playtime, adds skill checks based on the Savage Worlds and Deadlands Noir RPG using Harvey's stats for shooting. Oh boy, that's going to be interesting. New deadly story branches lead to meaningful results to your choices. Expands upon Harvey's relationships with characters from episode 1. And new achievements to unlock. Wonderful, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm intrigued. I liked Rabbi Saul. Ever since that business with Gospel Divine a while back, he and I had become pals. We got together at least once a week, chewing the fat, discussing sports and news, and generally just enjoying each other's company. We were both men who understood how crappy the world could be. Not that I wanted to convert or anything, but I did like the man. He only ever made his pitch once to me. It was over bourbon and pretzels at Murphy's down near the docks. The man could drink like a longshoreman, which made sense, considering that's what he'd done before the preaching gig took hold. Harv, he spoke over a glass of bourbon in that voice that stands out in New Orleans like a $5 tramp at a debutante ball. You'd make a mighty fine Jew, my lad. I had taken a sip, held it for a few moments on my tongue. Murphy knew his Kentucky bourbon, swallowed, and glared at Saul. Now why would you go and say a thing like that? Because you, my friend, know from suffering. Oi, do you know from suffering? We'd both stared at each other for a beat, then simultaneously burst out laughing for about 10 minutes. Then we'd gone back to talking about New Orleans' new baseball team, the Buglers. Saul and I usually met on Sunday, which amused both of us in a town full of Catholics and Protestants. I was mildly surprised when I got the call from him in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The strange tone in his voice did nothing to make me feel any better. Harv, you busy this afternoon? It didn't have that let's grab an early dinner, catch a show feel to it. My stomach got cold. Just supposed to track some lug when he gets off work. See if he's hitting the tracks before going home. I can put it off though. You know, I don't like interrupting a man's work, Harv, but he trailed off. And I was pretty sure that cold spot in my stomach was turning into an icy chunk. Our history being what it was, I knew a case was at hand, and it was going to be one of those cases. Don't you worry, Rabbi. See you at Murphy's in a half hour? The man looked like he'd seen a ghost when I saw him sitting at our usual booth far from the door. I hate being right about things like that. There was a man I knew of when I was but a boy, Harvey. You know, I'm a German Jew, born and raised in Augsburg, right? He was hitting his glass of bourbon pretty hard, and Murphy let me know subtly that he'd already had 2 doubles before I got there. Yeah, sure, Saul. You told me. I've always been surprised how you don't have much of an accent. Leastwise, not one that undercuts that New Yorker deli and taxis voice of yours. I was going for a laugh, but all I got was a brief smirk. Then that haunted look came back. Yeah, I'm the Yankee duck out of water. Still, I remember a lot from my childhood there. Frankly, there are some things I wish I didn't. He drained his glass and motioned for another. I'd never seen Saul put that much away. I'm not a man given to alarmist reactions, but I was starting to worry a bit. Okay, Rabbi, what is it? What kind of trouble are you in? He looked back at me a bit shocked. I had my no-nonsense face on, the kind of face that people often see before someone ends up shot. He seemed to pull himself together inside and set his features a bit firmer, too. No, Harv, it's not like that. Leastwise, I don't think so. It probably has nothing to do with me at all. Could be God just figured I should be around for when this guy popped back up again. He stared at the nearest window for a moment, then practically whispered. The big guy has a wicked sense of humor, you know? So who is this guy who popped back up? Someone from your childhood? In Germany? I didn't like coincidences. They almost never were. I knew his name as Richard Lohnherz. He was a very strange man, Harv. Spoke with a kind of English accent, but there was definitely something very French about him, too. Spoke German pretty well, but had a lot of archaic words in his dictionary, if you know what I mean. His eyes got a faraway look as he was clearly remembering the details. How he dressed and what he carried made him all the stranger, you see. Of course, the first time I saw him was in the middle of a riot, as he saved my father's life along with a number of others. Being a Jew in Europe's never been particularly easy, Harvey. Being a Jew in Germany over the last few decades or so has been really hard, though, and sometimes downright fatal. Folks want to blame us for everything, and losing the big war definitely falls into the category of things to beat Jews up for. I'm just glad we left before all that. Saul knew pain, both emotional and physical, but he always kept his good nature and his dignity, no matter what. I considered it something of an honor that he'd started letting me see how vulnerable he was to what had happened to him and his family, though it was also damn hard to take at times. The kinds of things that happened to his people were the kinds of things I usually got pretty riled up over. There are lines you just don't cross, but folks crossed them all the time when they were desperate, hungry, and lost with the need to blame someone else for their troubles. He went on, still with that distant look. They'd set a bunch of Jewish and immigrant businesses on fire, and folks were being drug out of their homes, lashed to poles, kind of like what they say happened to Jesus, being whipped and beaten up and down the streets. My father ran out with some others and got in the ringleader's face, demanding it all stop. He and the others didn't have any weapons. He was a man of peace, you see. Just didn't believe in bringing a weapon to talk to people. They weren't going to get any help from the local constabulary either. Half of those guys were in on it, and the rest were too smart to get themselves killed. Then this guy walks out of the alley. He's got on some kind of coat, like a duster your cowboys still wear out west. He has a wide-brimmed hat, but the brim is flat, and so's the top of the hat. Looked kind of like a missionary's topper, really. His clothes were mostly black, but as the coat flaps open, you can tell he's wearing a tabard under it. And, wait, what? I interrupted, not understanding at all what he meant. A tabard? Like from the medieval era? Like knights and squires and that stuff? You got it, Harv. I always thought it a good thing your mother made you read so much. He favored me with a genuine smile, then went back to his tale. Yeah, it was a tabard. It was white at some point, and some parts of it still were, and it had a red cross on it, like all the classic crusaders wore. It was torn and ragged, but he clearly tried to keep it in some kind of repair. That's not the strangest thing, though. Really? 'Cause that's pretty strange in my book. Kind of makes me think of the Knights Templar, the way they would depict their outfits. Yeah, well, it's what he brought out to make the riders back down and put an end to the violence that really caught the eye. Across his chest was a dual pistol rig, and I could swear to you those were Colt peacemakers he had strapped. He didn't draw them, though. Instead, out comes this long, heavy sword, and it's shining like the dickens in that firelight. This weren't no costume piece, Harvey. This was the bona fide real deal, and he knew how to use it. A lopped off hand here, cuts on faces and necks there, and he had those bastards running without a single actual death. That distant look had gone to a bit of wonder, and I let him revel a moment as I pondered what seemed like a load of bull from a man I trusted to be absolutely honest with me. After all, we'd shared in some pretty strange business together already. He hung around for a couple of days, Harv, making sure those thugs left us alone while folks put the fires out and repaired things. He even had a long talk with the local authorities, and he actually shamed them into doing their jobs. It was something to see. My papa actually asked for his name, and he just said, "Call me Richard, please." That was it. King Richard. Of course, folks started calling him Lowenhearts, and it stuck. He drained the rest of his current glass of bourbon, and I was relieved that he didn't signal for another one. Like I said, he left after 2 days, and that was the last I saw of him. He turned away from the window and looked me dead in the eyes, and for all he'd had to drink, they were crystal clear and full of conviction. Until yesterday, Harvey. Yesterday, I swear to you, I saw the man I knew as Richard Lowenhearts walk out of Bishop Brian McLarty's church, sure as we're sitting here at this table. The man didn't look a single day older than he did almost 50 years ago. I didn't bother asking what most would have asked. Saul was sure enough, and saying those words would have done nothing but damage the trust we had. Most folks would have shook their heads and walked away, convinced the old rabbi was nuts and to be avoided. Having died and pulled the Lazarus act myself once already, I had a bit more tolerance for nuts. I did have one question that needed answering, though. Saul, I get why you're a little unnerved, but if this guy's as good as you say and walks on the side of the angels, why are you so worried? You don't know much German, do you, Harv? It was rhetorical, aside from ordering sauerkraut on my dogs once in a while. I didn't speak a word of it. Lowenhearts isn't a typical German surname, my friend. It's a title that only one famous man is really known for, and my people honestly believed it was him who came and saved us. Leonhardt's is German for Lionheart. A crusader in New Orleans. Saul has a lot of money. He knows how to make it. He knows how to manage it well. He also happens to be a very smart man. I knew that since he was bringing me in on this, he wanted me to look into it as a professional private investigator. That being said, Saul's a pal, and I'd step up to do a favor for him anytime, as he would for me. I also knew he didn't need to discuss fees, because he'd see to it that a generous amount ended up in my bank account anyway. Ah, interesting. Time to wander the streets and see who knows anything about this guy. If there's a crusader in town, it's probably time to check in with my Catholic friend Bishop McLarty. Well, if he did come out of Bishop McLarty's church, that might be a good place to start. Let's go ahead and take a look there. I met the good Bishop Brian McLarty the same time I'd met Saul and Nolan's big hongun, Daddy Thunderhand. Of the three, it's fair to say I am the least close to Father Brian, mostly because I make him distinctly uncomfortable. Oh yeah, I remember that now. I don't really blame the poor guy. He's a devout Catholic surrounded by the kinds of things he was always taught to either deny the existence of or preach against in the most forceful of terms. Reality forced him to, instead, deal with folks who constantly shook his foundations. He has to do it to take care of his flock, and he's a good enough religious leader to do what he must for those who follow him, but he doesn't have to like it. I'm pretty sure the story about how I got dead and stood back up has a lot to do with this particular discomfort around me. After all, my name's not Lazarus, and it's not the Lamb either, so I don't have the right kind of claim on such miracles. Hell, it's not like I asked for it. Not that I'm complaining, either, but it did nothing to make my life less complicated, that's for sure. Regardless of how uncomfortable I make the good bishop, I had no doubt he'd see me and give me whatever he had on his Richard guy. After all, the more I dealt with the supernatural weirdness of the city, the less he'd have to. Imagine my surprise when I discovered how wrong I was. I'm sorry, Mr. Jenkins, but Bishop McLarty is simply not available at this time. She was cute, a bit thin for my taste, and a bit too severe with the minimalist makeup and the frock, but there was a subtle something under it all that told me she'd probably be a lot more approachable for the right guy, which, of course, I was nowhere near to being. Look, miss, the Padre knows me, and he probably knows why I'm here. His car is outside, and there's a light under that door, so you're going to have to do better than that. At least, go tell him I'm here. Her face didn't move an inch, but her eyes still managed to let me know that she wasn't going to let me talk around her orders like that. If you'd like to come back tomorrow, say, she glanced down at the calendar. Oh, never mind. He's booked up until at least late Thursday, it would seem. You know, and I know you're giving me the runaround, lady. If the Padre didn't want to talk to me, he ought to have the nerve to at least tell me to my face, considering what history we have. I assure you, Mr. Jenkins, that she got cut off as we both heard a raised voice behind the bishop's door. You need to go, Mr. Jenkins. Now, please. There are private church matters going on that you have no business in. Fine, I'll come back tomorrow, but he'd best be ready to see me then. Nuts to that. It is possible, but he's very uncomfortable around me and would like to avoid me as much as possible, so I don't see coming back tomorrow as being a good choice either. But at least it gives him a little leeway. And then be like, well, I gave you a chance, so fine. Frustrated and angry, I pulled out my flask and took a long pull. Then I set about doing what gumshoes are best known for. I've developed something of a problem in the Big Easy. People know who I am. That's not a bad thing for getting help from those that like me, or, as is more often the case, want something from me, or want me to owe them a favor. It is utterly crap for just sidling up to someone and chatting with them about the latest gossip about whatever I'm looking into. More often than not, the folks who most likely have the information I need find reasons to go the opposite direction when they see me coming. It can make for really long nights when I've got no other leads to work with. Of course, I do tend to start with the folks I get along with, and those who owe me favors, and those who want me on their good side. That can cut down the time a lot, especially if I get lucky. Then again, with a stranger like Richard Lowenhotz wandering around dressed like the rabbi says he is, luck is only part of it. A guy like that makes waves, no matter how subtle he might try to play things. The Easy knows when she's got odd company wandering her streets. After a few hours and well into the night, I pick up that big guy fitting the description I've got has been seen around town, apparently searching for something. Occasionally, he'd bust up fights, interfere in a mugging or beat down, that kind of thing. Mostly, though. He'd ask folks about children gathering together for some kind of grand purpose. Most folks shrugged it off as creepy and weird. Me, I figured it meant things were about to get a lot worse. Eventually, the information led me to a hotel pretty far off the beaten path, a place called Le Grand Maison. I apologize if I am butchering any of these names or places. Okay, staking out the place where my target is staying is always a solid bet. Nothing like the direct approach. Time to find what room he's in. If he's as bold as they say he is, might be safer to stake it out. Then again, he might creep up behind me and scare the dickens out of me, and then I'm still going face to face with him no matter what. So we'll see. Le Grand Maison was a nice place once. It had all the hallmarks, including all that fancy woodwork and trim and the carvings of flowers and women at all the corners. Unfortunately, it was in a part of town that didn't cater to the nice clientele anymore. Though if you had to stay in this area, the Grand Maison was probably still your best bet for a decent night's sleep, without too much worry for being robbed in the middle of the night. I found a decent spot to watch the main entrance, just outside a similarly run-down cafe. Plenty of tips kept the wait staff off my back while I parked for a good long while. A surprisingly good po' boy, 2 beignets and 4 cups of coffee later, my guy finally made an appearance. He was a big man, tall and lean. Even under the duster and other clothes, I could tell he was all muscle, no more real athlete than some thick-necked thug. He had long red-brown hair that flowed out from under that wide-brimmed hat Saul told me about. He had the look of a hunter about him, though he also looked about dead on his feet. He'd clearly been up a really long time, and he was obviously headed up to his room for some much-needed sleep. I felt bad for the guy, actually. After all, folks like me were all about getting in his way, and he looked a lot more like he could use help instead of interference. Help with what, though? That was why I was going to have to interrupt his sleep plans. I stood up, dropped a couple more bills on the little wrought iron table I'd been camped at, and started to make my way across the street to follow him up. He threw me for a loop by making a sudden turn and half running towards the alley around the corner of the building. I had to pick up my own pace to make sure I didn't lose him, which wasn't my idea of a subtle approach I'd hoped for. I moved into the alley expecting to have to break into a full run in order to find him. Instead, I nearly bowled him over as I ran into his back. Shh, listen. Let your sense of smell be open, friend. He whispered this, and as quiet as it was, it somehow went straight to my ears, and I held my own tongue. Like he instructed, I focused on what I could hear and smell. Heavy, almost animalistic breathing. A foul musk, like a wild animal berserk with fear and rage. Without another word, he slipped his sword, out of a scabbard you never even see if he didn't open his duster. He then handed me one of his revolvers, sparing me only the briefest of glances. I was struck by just how dark his eyes were, and how young his face was for someone who'd lived this long. I didn't take the revolver, instead going for my own pistol in its shoulder holster. He gave me a sharp look and a shake of his head, thrusting the revolver into my hand firmly. Has he got special bullets in that revolver he wants me to use? What are we fighting? It was a fine pistol, and the rabbi was right, an original Colt Peacemaker, but in mint condition. There were some pretty interesting inscriptions on it, too. I decided to go with it for the moment, and he drew the other revolver. Then he started to move slowly down the alley, indicating that I should follow and watch behind us. God is my witness, I had no idea why I was so readily following this loon into who knew what. Stick with Lowenhart's. Hang back and see how this plays out. No, I'd prefer not to die tonight, so let's stick with him. Oh, Lord. Oh, goodness. Okay. Displaying an utter lack of sound judgment, I stuck close to him as we both slowly made our way down the alley. The stench was getting worse by the second, and the heavy breathing had turned into a low, rumbling growl. Finally, my new partner spoke. Saul was right about his accent. For all the world, I kept thinking he sounded like an Englishman trying to do a Western U.S. accent. You stalked me, creature, perhaps to pay me out for what I've done to your kin. An unwise choice, I assure you, for you have stalked the hunter, and now the hunter stalks you. He was completely relaxed. There wasn't an ounce of nervousness in him from what I could tell. When the pile of cans and boxes senses exploded and a gigantic mass of fur and claws and teeth came flying out of it at him. He seemed to actually loosen up a bit as his reflexes took over. I could have sworn I saw a slight smile play on his lips as he raised the revolver and fired a shot. The werewolf, it could be nothing else, from all I knew, was a fast one. He twisted in midair and caught the slug in the shoulder. It looked pretty bad, and he howled like the heavens were burning his soul. Considering the bullet was clearly silver, that weren't far off from the truth, though I had to think there was more going on with that shot as silvery fire shot out from the wound. Yep, I'd prefer to have a hold of this revolver instead, thank you. Blessed by a friend of mine, creature. His name is Michael, and if you repent now, you may be blessed to see him soon. He could have been having a reasonable conversation with a colleague about religion or the latest baseball scores by the tone of his voice. It's been said I have ice water in my veins, but there are things that scare me, and I'm not afraid to admit that. I didn't think the man with the sword had ever been truly frightened in his life, which made him truly insane in my book. Enraged, the werewolf howled to split the night again, and then he got clever. Instead of pressing the attacker directly, he leapt from the pile of cans off to Richard's left, then flung a big one at him. Caught at least a little off guard, Richard swung his sword to knock the can down out of the air. The beast timed it nicely, though, and leapt in at the same time, hoping to take advantage of the Crusader's already engaged blade. Oh, skill check. Oh, great. Shoot. Blam! I cored him right through the forehead, and with that shot, and I was pretty sure holy silver in the brain pan of a werewolf was going to do the trick. But you can't be too careful in situations like this. Never saw or heard anything until the hot flash of agony erupted in my upper back. Uh-oh, you didn't pay attention behind you. She was the sneaky one, no doubt. And she was all about sneaking up and making a meal out of the man who'd just blown a hole in the forehead of her apparent mate. The last thing I saw as the red turned to gray was Richard running at her with his sword, face set in that grim battle way men have when there's nothing left but the killing. Then I heard the howling scream and felt her blood pouring all over me as Gray went blissfully to quiet black. Did I just die? Harvey, why I gotta wait till you got holes in you before I gets to see you again, child? That smoky, sultry voice slid right into my consciousness as I came around, and I couldn't suppress a smile. As I recall, Mama, it was you who canceled our last date. I don't think you can call me sitting with you on a stakeout outside a casino much of a date, Harvey. I got better things to do with my time than that. Even as she said it, my eyes opened to see the gentler side of her as she looked on me with concern. In particular, she was checking the wound that Lady Werewolf gave me. I knew exactly why she was so worried, too. Wounds from lycanthropes had a nasty way of infecting you in ways that meant far worse than a long hospital stay, or even death. I think it'd be okay, Harvey, though I'm gonna want another look at it in a few days. You don't mess around with Lupe Goro, you know that. I sat up, slowly, and with her help, wincing as the stitches pulled. Ow, 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 ow. That hurts thinking about it. Luckily, knock on wood, I've never broken a bone or had to get stitches, but I've dislocated my knees, and it hurts. They say that dislocating can actually hurt worse than actually breaking. Oh, I don't want to think of what an actual break would feel like. No, thank you. She was a decent medic, but using her services instead of going to an ER had its drawbacks too. It's not like she signed on to be a doctor or anything. Where's... She looked at the door. Other room. Reading through some old books I got. Says the bishop done told him to bring you here, though he apparently meant to come see me some point anyway. She looked pensive at that, and I could tell the situation worried her. I actually didn't mean to drag you into this one, hon. Still, it's got enough mystical stuff all over it. I suppose it was inevitable. She cracked a wide smile at that, leaned in to kiss me, and stood up and went over to fix me some kind of drink. Don't you never mind, Miss Jenkins. Like I said, he was planning to see me anyway, it seemed. And I gotta say, I would have been sad to miss a chance to meet the long walker. I paused, and putting my shirt back on at that. Long walker? She brought 2 containers of liquid over, a teacup and a shot glass. She handed me the brew in the cup first, which I dutifully gulped, even though it was as rancid as a concoction I'd ever choked down. I quickly threw the shot down after, which helped immensely. Yeah, Harvey. He got a history. You listen to the right stories. They say he been walking the earth for centuries, looking into the dark places, finding the monsters, doing what he can. They say he been wandering out west a long, long time now, ever since they start dragging that ghost rock out of the earth. Now I see him. I believe them stories. He got a very, very old soul, Harvey. Full of pain, full of sad. I was stunned to see a tear fall fearfully down her cheek. Instinctively, I reached up and wiped it away, and she leaned in close and let me give her a reassuring hug. He seems all right enough to me, if a bit strange, Mama. Handy with that sword, I can tell you. Now that he's taken down those werewolves, I'm guessing he'll be moving on. She gave me a wry look, arching an eyebrow. Harvey, he didn't come here for no guru. They nothing but a hole in the road to him. He's here for something else, I guarantee. He been all kind of interested in my books, especially the ones about holy places in this city. I finished getting dressed, looked longingly at the whiskey bottle she'd poured my shot from, then headed to the door and opened it. What are you doing here, Richard? Why are you in New Orleans? So how do you like Mamba Bonte's hospitality, friend? I can be direct, or beat around the bush. Let's see. Technically, he hasn't introduced himself yet. She calls him the Long Walker. Others have called him Richard Lawnhearts. And he's in, what, 50 years ago, the guy said to call him Richard. Okay, so I guess calling him by name's fine. Be like, well, I know your name. Let's see. Let's do the other one. So, friend, what is it that brings you to town? He'd taken off his duster and his chainmail armor and was sitting around in denim jeans and a cotton pullover shirt. His pistol rig and sword were laying on a table nearby, though I had little doubt he'd have either in hand and ready to fight in mere moments if the situation called for it. I was really hoping it wouldn't. Ah, good. I see you are well. I am glad Bishop McClarty advised me to bring you here, though I know it caused him distress when I once again arrived on his doorstep. He closed the book in his hand, stood effortlessly, and gracefully moved across the room to replace it on the shelf where it came from. I watched him and couldn't help but marvel at the fact that he moved like a 20-year-old ballet dancer, not the centuries-old warrior he was. He turned to face me, his hands clasped behind his back. A sure sign that he trusted me, or that he at least trusted that I was no credible threat to him. Either Milady Bonte is far more knowledgeable about me than I imagined, or Bishop McClarty broke his vow, or you are an exceedingly good detective, Jenkins, to know my name. Actually, friend, you may have a problem similar to mine. More people starting to know who you are than you might imagine. At any rate, McClarty broke no vows, got your name from another friend, one who met you when he was a boy. He's the one that asked me to look into why you're in town. Mama Bonte had edged into the room while we talked, and she was giving him a long, appraising look as she made her way to one of the comfortable chairs of her parlor and sat down. She seemed to be enjoying something about the exchange. He seemed to be considering my words fairly deeply, as he also sat down. I see your point, Jenkins. Perhaps it was foolish of me to think I'd remain unknown for so long. May I ask who it is that lives here and knows me? Maybe later, when I am sure about what your purpose here is, Lionheart. He looked up sharply at that. I would greatly appreciate it if you did not use that particular sobriquet with me, sir. It is not a name I bear with any pride, only shame. Fair enough. I decided being the only one standing, especially since I was the one who had the most unintended holes in his carcass at the moment, was fairly stupid, so I found myself a chair as well. I still want to know why you're in town. You don't have to tell me, but I aim to find out one way or another. And since you like things to stay simple... He chuckled at that. Indeed. Very well, Mr. Jenkins, Lady Bonte. I shall tell you. I am here to stop the children's crusade from launching anew. Mama Bonte and I just stared at him, then each other, and back at him. "Come again?" He smiled. It wasn't patronizing at all. It had the quality of sincere understanding. "I shouldn't exist, yet I do, because God and the Tempter both have interesting senses of humor. There are many things at work in this world, as you both well know. You also know there are many ways in which something that should be dead is not." I nodded at that and shifted uncomfortably. Mama just smiled at me. "One such thing is Nicholas of Cologne, the shepherd who attempted to reach the Holy Lands with his followers across the Alps. His mad quest was doomed, and all thought he died alongside the last of his followers in their final push. Instead, something very dark possessed young Nicholas, feeding off of his obsession and his mystical gift for drawing followers. He is now called Nicholas the Bitter. I've tracked him for a very long time, and now I am certain he is here in New Orleans, where he intends to launch a new children's crusade. Only this time, he is determined to cleanse the New World of what he deems as corruption and evil, planning to rule in God's name over these lands. I'd heard a lot in my time in this business, and seen a lot too. Enough to know I couldn't dismiss what his apparent madman was telling me. Still, I knew I was going to need a few more drinks in me before the night was over. "All right, saying I believe you and we decide to help you, what next?" We spent the rest of the night making plans. He agreed to lay low, mostly to avoid getting into any scraps with the sons of James, and let me do the necessary poking around. He pointed the way, though. He will gather children to him. I think it is time to check the orphanages for missing children. Someone like him has bound to create some missing person cases. Time to check the police station. I guess if you're starting a revolt with children, I would go to the orphanage first. They only have ties to each other. They don't have ties to parents, and a lot of them probably aren't religious because they didn't have parents to teach them to be that and take them to church and drill in the terror of thinking the wrong thing and you'll go to hell. So that's my opinion anyway. That's my reasoning. Let's see. This is really outside the police's jurisdiction in my opinion also. So let's try the orphanage first. Uh-oh, well, this is already starting out great. After a good deal of footwork and phone calls, I figured out there'd been a ton of runaway reports from all of the orphanages in the city over the last couple of weeks, many more than usual, which had all of the administrators in an uproar. Most of them were worried about their charitable donations or subsidies tanking, but at least a few were good enough to be genuinely concerned about the kids and wanted me to find them. It wasn't until I got to the house of the Good Shepherd, however, that I discovered things had become more sinister and more desperate. The scent of drying blood and other stenches I know only too well mean that a lot of death lies ahead. Wafted out of the front door, which was cracked open, ahead. As soon as I walked inside, I saw the first two bodies, a woman dressed like the kind of matron I'd expect in an orphanage, and a man in work clothes meant for tending a garden. So was the rake he'd clearly been trying to use as a weapon against whoever had killed him. The two of them were cut up horribly, gashes all over their bodies. It looked like they'd been in the worst knife fight I'd ever seen, except I knew right away those weren't knife wounds. They were from a sword. The children are gone, each and every one. You will find only death here, Mr. Jenkins. I spun around fast, hand going for my pistol. I had it out and pointing at the source of the voice, but the man I faced only stood in the door, the light from outside framing his silhouette. He had on robes of some kind, and as my eyes adjusted, it seemed pretty clear they were of that strangely archaic variety the really hardcore Catholics wear. I intend you no harm. If I did, you would be dead. The sons of James are flawless in such matters. Instead, I offer you this warning. The cursed one is a monster who brings such death wherever he goes. He must be put down. He will be put down and his soul cast into the abyss where it belongs. These are yet more souls he must account for eternity in the fires of hell. I said nothing. There are times when a single word in any direction will give the whole game away, and this seemed like one of those times. Walk away, Mr. Jenkins. You have done good works, and we would see you continue until your time for release is at hand. Do not force us to act on that before you are due for removal. Excuse you? That was enough. Due for? Heed me, Harvey Jenkins. Your part in this story is over. Go home. We will deal with this evil utterly and finally. Then he pulled the door closed, sending the whole place into pitch black. I ran and threw it back open, but he was gone. Too many people I dealt with had the trick down. I needed to learn it.